Hello, I'm Mario Toneguzzi, managing editor of Canada's podcasts, taking care of business today with Adam Legge, president of the Business Council of Alberta. Thanks for joining us today, Adam.
Thanks for having me on the show, Mario.
Well, I want to talk about a report that you folks have released called Future Unbuilt, Transforming Canada's Regulatory Systems to Achieve Environmental, Economic, and Indigenous Partnership Objectives. Tell me just a little bit about the report in general, Adam, and what it was all about.
Well, Mario, the report is a response to the fact that the country has incredibly ambitious environmental targets, both 2030 and net zero by 2050. We have the need to ensure stable and affordable energy in the country, and we have the need to ensure Indigenous reconciliation with Indigenous peoples of Canada. So what really became apparent around that is that takes a ton of money, a ton of capital. But the capital isn't coming to Canada because our regulatory process is too slow, too cumbersome, and too unpredictable. So when we broached the subject with the federal government, they said, yes, we are open to suggestions and recommendations. So we struck a task force made up of members of the Business Council of Alberta who've gone through the process across a number of industries, outside experts in terms of regulatory affairs and legal activity, and even some former folks from the National Energy Board came up with a variety of recommendations about how do we improve the regulatory system in Canada. We did it in two parts. One was, what would an ideal model look like if we started from scratch? But we know that's not necessarily practical, nor would it happen in time. So we then said, what are some of the things we can do under the existing system, some of the improvements that can be made? So we identified really 9 challenge areas, and then 4 what we call needle movers, which are the things that if government said to us, what should we do first? We think those needle movers are the areas where we can improve most quickly and with the greatest amount of impact. So ultimately, the report is a set of solutions to respond to Canada's need to attract capital, to ultimately put in place the infrastructure, the investment, and the opportunities that we need for the future.
Okay, in a nutshell, Adam, what are those 4 needle movers?
Well, the first one is that right now the Minister of the Environment can designate a project to go through the impact assessment process, even though it technically doesn't qualify through a set of criteria. Many companies have expressed concern about the fact that it is such broad, sweeping unilateral powers. So we're suggesting that first and foremost that the government establish a set of criteria that the minister would need to adhere to before a project becomes designated. The second is that once the projects have gone through the impact assessment process, then needs to go to different departments, both federally, provincially, and even municipally for permits. 2 issues arise there. One is that often the independent departments want all the same information, and they come to the proponents asking for the same thing over and over again. So we're saying that there needs to be a streamline around that, so that the permit process is coordinated by a single body within the federal government, so that the information can be accessed readily. And then B, once the permits are approved, that they're issued very quickly. There can be a long delays in the issuance of permits. Thirdly, that under the Act, the projects can be scaled based on complexity in terms of the review process, but every single project that's gone through so far has taken up the maximum amount of time. So we're encouraging the Impact Assessment Agency to use its power to ensure that scaling. We don't put projects through any more necessary activity than is required. And then finally, there's a key piece about ensuring Indigenous participation, not only through the review process, but in the participation in the projects that are coming through in their communities. So we're suggesting that the federal government create a national version of what we have in Alberta called the Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Corporation, which is essentially a loan guarantee program, enables them to go and achieve equity loans for involvement in projects, and then 2, help build the capacity in communities that don't necessarily have the expertise about how to evaluate impacts and opportunities throughout their communities when major projects come through there.
Okay, so how much money is needed to be invested to meet a lot of those targets?
Well, there have been estimates that we will need somewhere in the neighborhood of about 125 to 150 billion every year for the next 20 years. We're investing as a country about 1/5 of that. Now, that doesn't all come from the federal government. That's a combination of both government and private sector. but
Yeah.
we are well behind in terms of what we need to be investing to achieve our targets as a nation.
Is that achievable in any way that, when you're throwing out those billion-dollar numbers, that's quite huge.
It's pretty significant, Mario. We know that there is vast amounts of capital looking for good homes across the globe. But having said that, many countries are also trying to attract the capital. In fact, the U.S. is using their Inflation Reduction Act to attract capital to invest in their country. It's hard to know whether we'll hit that target every year for the next 20 years. It's ambitious. But being in a place where we're known to have difficulty getting projects done, we know that capital is not coming to Canada. And so we need to pave the way for the capital to be attracted here in the way that it would be easy to get projects done, such that we can make some progress and not be at a fifth of the number we are at currently.
And where does the capital need to be invested in? Like what areas?
It's a host of projects, quite frankly. It's everything from decarbonizing our electricity grid. It's about decarbonizing our oil and gas activities. So CCUS is a huge piece. It could include small modular reactors. It could include critical mineral mines. It could include hydrogen, both the development, extraction, and transportation of hydrogen, geothermal, renewables, export terminals for many of these energy products. So it's a vast array to help decarbonize our economy, to help hit our emissions targets, but also create jobs and economic growth, both in Indigenous communities and in non-Indigenous communities as well.
All right. Thank you, Adam, for joining us today.
Thanks, Mario, for having me.
All right. That was Adam Legge, president of the Business Council of Alberta. I'm Mario Toneguzzi, managing editor of Canada's podcast, Taking Care of Business. Thanks for joining us.